President Trump is expected to demand a large increase in military spending in tonight's address. Yesterday, the White House announced it will be asking Congress for an additional $54 billion in defense spending. This, they say, will be paid for by cutting domestic programs and foreign aid. Here's what the president also had to say about this proposed military buildup in that interview we mentioned on Fox News earlier.
Well, we're going to spend a lot more money on military. We really have to. We have no choice. And a lot of people think it's a tremendous amount of money. It could be actually $30 million, $30 billion more than that. We're going to upgrade our military very substantially. Remember this, I also am going to get involved in negotiating. We have many planes and boats and ships and everything that we are spending too much money individually on. We're going to get involved in negotiating. We're going to be able to get, I think, a lot more product for our buck.
All right, so let's bring in CBS News Foreign Affairs and White House correspondent Margaret Brennan. Margaret, good morning to you. This $54 billion, how does the president pay for it?
Well, the White House hasn't said exactly how they expect to pay for it because they won't produce a full budget until mid-March. What they've said so far is that to pay for that 10% boost in defense spending, they're going to cut discretionary programs, domestic programs. The director of OMB said earlier today, yes, that probably would include a significant cut to the Environmental Protection Agency and specifically cuts in U.S. foreign aid. Now, the challenge there is even if you did cut at those agencies, it doesn't get you to the $54 billion that the White House has promised they'll cut here. And if you look at the U.S. foreign aid budget, even if you reduced it, you wiped it out entirely, that's only $36 billion. So while these are items that the White House is talking about right now, they are sort of shiny objects that may appeal and fit within the rhetoric of America First, but they don't ultimately get the kind of savings that the president needs to get to with that later budget. And the expectation from Republicans is that it would involve some painful cuts to costly programs, entitlement spending on Social Security and elsewhere. But at this point, President Trump is doubling down on that campaign promise, saying he's not going to touch those. So we don't yet know how the math is truly going to add up.
Yeah, so this foreign aid debate is interesting, Margaret, because some say that the money goes to some of these foreign governments. Nobody even knows that it came from the U.S. Or where exactly it goes. But then you have some of the generals pushing back, saying, listen, some of this is necessary because it prevents problems in the future.
Right. Well, this idea of don't spend abroad, spend at home polls well. It sounds good on the campaign trail. But if you look at the actual numbers here, foreign aid is less than 1% of federal spending. It's actually a very small percentage of the U.S. budget overall. $36.5 billion is what we spent last year. Some of that food aid, some of that foreign military sales. So what we're hearing from the White House is that they're going to cut back on things like development assistance, on aid to starving countries, on some of the sort of goodwill gestures that America has done in the past that national security officials say you should actually view as an investment that will ultimately pay off in helping build up American security. And we saw over 120 retired U.S. generals, including the former CIA director, General Petraeus and General John Allen, who led the coalition against ISIS, saying don't do this because it ultimately creates a risk and it will hurt our men and women in uniform. Basically, if you spend on foreign aid, you can keep us off the battlefield rather than pushing us out there. They echoed that famous quote from now Defense Secretary, then General Jim Mattis, who said, if you don't fully fund the State Department, you're going to need to buy me more ammunition.
Margaret, finally, I want to ask you about the Russian relationship. I think we have there's been calls for the special prosecutor to look into the relationship between Russia and Trump campaign, Trump officials. Paul Ryan spoke this morning. Let's take a listen to that first, and then we'll get your reaction.
Is there anything you could hear that would make you decide we need a special prosecutor to look into that?
Well, that's the executive branch.
I understand.
We think we need to do an investigation here with our intelligence committees. There's one thing that's unique about this, which is this gets into the methods of collection of intelligence data, sources and methods. That's very, very sensitive. It's the most sensitive tool in our national security toolbox. That is why we have an intelligence committee of men and women in Congress who have gone through the process of understanding those tools. The point is we need to get answers. We need to make sure that nothing happened that shouldn't have happened as we go forward. That's exactly what we do in our jobs as Congress, but we think the intelligence committee is the right place to do it.
Margaret, the reaction there, if there is one yet, to what Paul Ryan and others are saying about a potential special prosecutor?
Well, look, the White House is pushing back entirely on these stories. They don't want to be talking about Russia. They find it to be a distraction, and they're frustrated by what President Trump feels like is still politically loaded, rather than what the FBI has focused in on in their counterintelligence division, which is, not only contacts between the Trump campaign and Russian officials possibly, but also the hacking that was related to interfering with the U.S. election, and of course that broader contact between now former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn and the Russian ambassador, and the appropriateness of this. So there are a few different storylines here. We know that Congress is really still just in their intelligence committees gathering information. They haven't fully come to conclusions yet, because those investigations are also underway at the FBI. So in some ways, the White House is right to say don't jump ahead to the special prosecutor, but there are those who would argue, as Congressman Darrell Issa did a few days ago, a Republican, that this in some ways would remove some politics from it if you get a special prosecutor and make it less politically charged than keeping it on the Hill. But it seems right now the White House argues there's not enough evidence to even say there's much of a case here. They argue that there is no broader probe that has added up to anything. Basically, they'd like this to die and go away.
Margaret, before you leave, can I just, we just heard from Paul Ryan, and I think the relationship between the Speaker and the President, I think, is a source of great fascination on the Hill right now, especially after this meeting yesterday, when Paul Ryan was asked about entitlement reform. I mean, this is a signature issue for him. Yeah. He wants to reform Social Security and Medicare. The President right now doesn't want to touch it, at least. He was asked about entitlement reform after this meeting yesterday, and he said, well, repeal and replace, and Obamacare, reforming that would be entitlement reform. So are these two seemingly diametrically opposed positions going to come together at all on entitlement reform?
Well, if you were a betting man, you'd say, in the wake of a campaign that was built on populism and promises from then candidate Donald Trump not to do things that hurt what he calls the forgotten man, the working class, that he's going to try to stick to that promise of not cutting back on entitlements like Social Security and Medicare. But the problem is the math doesn't add up unless you do cut into those really costly programs. And we saw just in the past few days the president tweeting about the national debt, something that he doesn't really have much influence on at this point at all, but he is acknowledging, he is aware that there is a real financial risk here and financial weight to decisions. So he seems to be pushing off what would be a very unpopular decision, but one that the House Speaker knows and has talked about for years now is going to be a necessary one to really, in any way, make some of these programs viable in the long term and keep spending along the targets that the White House would like them to be. But it's interesting, Jeff, because you see in that comparison a Republican versus a Trump conservative, and trying to work together to actually legislate and come through with big legislative plans and laws and bills. That we haven't gotten to that messiness yet, and I think that story is just beginning. Obamacare is going to be the first place we really see it.
You saw some of the ice broken, I think, on this issue yesterday afternoon. Margaret Brennan, thank you very much.